Tēnā koutou katoa and welcome everybody to the Westpac Smarts webinar, Professional Services, How the Sector Can Thrive in Changing Times, where we hope to bring practical tips and insights from our business partners to our professional services business community and customers to help you set up for success in the evolving business environment. Over the past few years, we have faced many tough challenges that have come with the COVID-19 pandemic, including navigating lengthy lockdowns that have affected us not only professionally but personally as well, and have fundamentally changed the way we work, the way people want to work, and what our customers expect. And with that, our strategies moving forward. With spring on the horizon, it offers many of us the opportunity to reset and evolve our thinking, both for ourselves and our business. My name is McKnight, Head of Professional Services for Westpac Business Bank, and today I'm very excited to be joined by Paul Clark, Industry Economist at Westpac, Emily Morrow, Executive Consultant, and Andrew Jacka, owner of Value Squared. We're here this morning to discuss the critical success factors for professional services firms, how to look at your firm and reset your strategy from the perspective of your people, your customers, and your business, what's in your market positioning, how you are putting the clients at the heart of your organisation, and how you are continuing to increase your organisational agility. Just to touch on a couple of housekeeping things before we begin, if you have any questions during, please feel free to ask in the conversation box on the right of your screen, and we'll get through as many of these as we can at the end of today's session. There will also be a survey poll at the end of the session, so please give us feedback on today's webinar, as we'd really appreciate it. So firstly, to start today's discussion, Emily, would you like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yes, happy to do that, Amber. First of all, it's really nice to be here. So I'm a recovered lawyer. I practiced law for many years, was a managing partner for a large law firm, and now I work as a consultant to lawyers and law firms, primarily in New Zealand. And my focus is on the soft skills, working with lawyers and law firms and developing soft skills that include things such as communication, people management, self-presentation, succession planning, and of course, strategic planning in the mix. The three areas that I work in are one-on-one coaching with individuals, working with small groups and teams, and then working across an entire entity, an entire law firm. And my focus is to develop those kinds of soft skills that will be immediately correlating with high performance in practice across a firm. And I work with firms across New Zealand, everything from top tier to the smaller regional firms.
Great, thank you, Emily. Great to have you here. Andrew, would you like to do the same?
So my name is Andrew Jacka. I've been helping professional service firms manage, sort of find better ways of increasing their profitability, mainly with a focus on customer value and how do you capture a fair share of that customer value in your prices, helping partners with their skills to be able to do that, and helping them with their sales conversations and negotiations. And we do that through a variety of skills development, playbooks, and also tool sets. Tool sets mainly focused on ensuring that the firms have consistency across their different pricing and across their value propositions. And I guess I've been doing that for the last 30 or so years, mainly focused in the Asia Pacific region and the occasional foray into Europe and Americas.
Great, thank you, Andrew, and fantastic to have you here as well. And Paul, would you like to do the same?
Sure. Hi, everyone. As Amber has just indicated, I'm the industry economist at Westpac. I work in the economics team, and you might be able to see some of the economics team behind me. My role is really to look at what makes industry tick. That covers quite a few things, but really it boils down to how do firms compete in a particular industry. And in this particular case, what do they have to be good at in order to succeed? So that's really my little introduction.
Great, thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. So to start today's session, I'll hand back over to Paul, who will provide a short overview of the findings from the Westpac Economics Professional Services Insights paper. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Amber. Yeah, I mean the report is quite a large report. I mean it covers a whole gamut of professional services, everything from management consultancy and engineering consultancy all the way through to architectural, legal, and accounting services. The report itself covers a lot of factors that shape the demand and supply of professional services, but obviously the critical success factors that apply within that environment. But I'd like to briefly touch on the impact of digital technologies, which are, I think, fundamentally changing the nature of the landscape facing industry participants. On the demand side, digital technologies are increasing customer expectations of professional services. On the supply side, we're seeing professional services increasingly using digital technologies to streamline their operations and automate time-consuming tasks. They're also using it to actually change their business models. Service providers are becoming much more customer-centric, and that's a tired phrase by now, but where the focus is on being responsive and achieving the outcomes that are best for the customer rather than just service delivery excellence. I suppose with that in mind, the report identifies really three things that professional service firms have to be good at in order to succeed, and those are listed in the slide in front of you. And I think the first is really understand what you're about, a clear understanding of market positioning. That really is about understanding where you sit on the practice spectrum, and often that's not as easy as it might seem. You know, things change, so where you were sitting 5 years ago may be different today, and so firms can be held out, can be found out if they don't continually monitor where they sit on the practice spectrum. They need to understand, of course, their value offering and how that might have changed over time. I suppose that aligns to the first point I've made. By so doing, you're able to, as it says in the slide, minimize the mismatch between how customers view the services that are being offered, as well as how professional service firms actually provide those. So there's a greater match between the two. Um, the report goes on to talk about the requirement in order to, when you understand your market positioning, is really you need to continually innovate with new products. And that's a little bit of cannibalization of the products, introduce new products. And often for firms, that can be difficult, especially where you have services, I call it products and services that generate revenues. And sometimes you find firms obsess over those revenues rather than profitability. So that's the first critical success. Really understand your market positioning and how that might have changed, and perhaps how that might have changed relative to your competitors. I suppose the second one is really an old saying, really, and we all say it, no matter which industry you're in, is put the customer at the heart of the business. And I really see two things there. I think identify customer segments, know who your customers are, basically, and that can be done, customer segment to do that, and the like. The second thing, I suppose, is moving from just providing outputs, but actually delivering the outcomes that customers seek. So the old model was, well, we just produce a service and then the customer takes that service and bears the risk if that service fails. Under new models, where we're looking at outcomes, it's more about how do professional services deliver on the success or deliver success to the businesses that or to the firms that they supply services to. So we shift from delivering outputs to achieving outcomes. And I think I've got in my notes here, increasingly professional service firms are being judged less on the services they provide and more on how they help customers get to where they want to be. That, of course, is a departure from the past, which was largely based on delivering customer excellence, more about managing projects, mitigating risk, and responding to cost escalations. My third critical success factor is really around increasing organizational agility. And I know the other two speakers will talk a little bit more about this, but I see that as really being two things. First, having access to the factors of production. And a large part of that, of course, this is a knowledge-based industry. This is about accessing skills and the competencies of workers, which are in short supply. And there's more and more competition for those, for that those skills and competencies. So that's making it tougher. So how do you actually access those skills, and how can digital technologies help in that regard? The report refers to places and how they've sprung up, and gig workers as being two avenues. The second is how you combine those factors of production to deliver organizational agility. And it really talks about what I've got on the slide there, the adoption of flexible, scalable, multidisciplinary teams that deliver end-to-end accountability for service delivery. We're moving away from silo-based of the past and using digital technologies to do that, to teams that basically will market the product and actually market the service rather, and take that service all the way through the different steps to service delivery. And that's becoming a key in the industry. And digital technologies are helping do that, removing a lot of the hierarchical structure operating models, moving to flatter ways of doing things, or flatter structures, for want of a better word. So that's really my critical success factors. 3 of them: clear understanding of market position, know where you are, know where you operate, know your customer, make sure you deliver what the customer is looking for in terms of delivering to or contributing to their success, and actually sharing in the rewards of that, and increasing agility, setting yourself up to be able to deliver those outcomes. That is my 5 minutes, I think.
Great, thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. So, how do firms align themselves with these critical success factors, and what should people be thinking about in their own business to bring them to life? To discuss this, we'll now move to with the first section about focusing on your strategy. So we've already covered how the COVID-19 pandemic and the following change in employee expectations and the economic environment has had and continues to have a significant impact on everyone, both professionally and personally. In professional services, many saw significant increases in workload over the past 2 years, with this starting to drop back in some places as we move through 2022, coupled with changed workplace culture and expectations in a sector whose backbone is human capital. We are seeing a need for changes to strategies to set your business up for success in this new operating and economic environment. So, Andrew, the demand for professional services shifts with the economy. It shifted during the pandemic and will likely shift again with the economic climate. What do you see the smarter firms doing to reshape their strategy and value they offer to clients to protect, or even better, grow their bottom line?
Thanks, Amber. Yeah, so I've approached this in 2 ways. One is looking at how do they improve their customer value so that they can grow their bottom line and also open up new streams of revenue. And then secondly, what do they need to do to protect their business in these economic times? So I think Paul has explained quite well sort of what's going on in the economy, maybe with one exception, because the report was probably a little bit before what's happening right now. But with COVID, there's a lot of parts of the economy were restrained in their ability to be able to provide services. It led to a whole lot of supply issues for professional services. A lot of firms struggled with a lot of their staffing and their talent, securing them, especially if they source them globally. And definitely that lack of that the offshore experts coming into New Zealand and Australia. I spent a lot of time in Australia. That put a lot of shortage into the staffing and talent bases for a lot of professional services firms. On the other side of that, there's a lot of demand stimulation, which created a lot of growth, but it was all very uneven. So some sectors did very, very well out of that, and the professional services and professional service firms providing services to those sectors did quite well as well out of that. Some sectors were in a lot of trouble and needed a lot of advice. And so I think a lot of professional services went very, they had good years on the back of that increased demand for advice that comes from the professional services sector. So now we're sort of moving into the next stage of that. So with all of that stimulus creating high demand and the supply constraints, that has led to inflation, and that's probably the new thing that I see a lot of firms now struggling to deal with. The governments and the central banks are reacting to that inflation, and they're trying to remove some of that stimulus and create a slowdown, and they're hoping to do it without creating a recession. And that, once again, introduces a whole lot of unevenness and uncertainty into the economy. And so once again, there is an opportunity for professional service firms, especially the accounting, consulting, advisory side, rather than the engineering and the architectural firms. But those firms, they have opportunities to once again play that role of advisor. So previously, it's sort of, okay, well, half my business being shut down, I've got to change all my contracts if you're a law firm. So the law firms are in demand to try and work out how we're going to manage all the agreements throughout the economy. Now it's going to be probably something more typical as we approach a slowdown and recession. Then how are we going to reduce costs? How are we going to deal with funding in a very different funding environment? And what are we likely to see in terms of government intervention to, and I imagine that government intervention will be quite contradictory in that they'll be applying the accelerator and the brakes at the same time in an uneven way as well. So getting advice around how do the professional service firms clients face up to that, and make sure that they've got the right offerings in the market is going to be key. So for firms, what can they do? Well, first of all, need to keep up with inflation. So inflation, CPI in New Zealand, 7.3%. There's talk in the media that could drop away. The way I see it is I think a lot of firms have carried the cost of inflation on the way up, and I'd be very careful about also carrying the cost by going with the prediction that inflation will drop away, and therefore don't increase prices not increasing your pricing on the way down. And with that, we need to build our negotiation muscle, because having CPI sitting at 1.3%, these are conversations we haven't really had with clients for a long, long time. So we need to build that muscle so we can actually have that conversation, and things like rise fall clauses and better contractual mechanisms to deal with what's happening with the value of money need to be brought into our agreements. Second thing is, with all this change and uncertainty and unevenness, as I said, our clients are going to be requiring more advice. So introducing new higher value products and services around your normal products and services to deal with this uncertainty is key. Communicating in the market around some of these themes that Paul's paper, or the paper, has introduced are very key as well. And that might be same product and service, but just changing the way we talk about it, changing a value proposition. So adapting that to the new environment, and Paul's gone through a lot of those. So it's digital's everywhere, but it could be, is it digital for cost management? Is it digital for speed and value? Is it digital for finding the right talent using artificial intelligence in ways to drive better results? But also purpose, ESG, it's in the paper. How do organisations match what's being required in the market and by regulators around those things? And professional services have a big role to play in all of that. And then lastly, I think it's just keeping an eye on the commercials in all of this. So doing I think the term is rinse your cottage cheese. Just make sure you're managing your firm tightly. As the slowdown happens, we're going to have unprofitable segments. It's making sure that we exit them where we need to. So that would be my summary of it all.
Great, thanks for that, and some really good, important things to be thinking about for everyone. So Emily, we have had almost 2 years now facing the challenges and the change that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought. And what is certain is that much of this change is here to stay. So what do firms need to be thinking about in terms of to make sure their people strategy complements their commercial goals as well as their staff's?
Yeah, really good question, Amber, and certainly a very germane one now. And I guess I wanted to kind of rephrase that question a little bit, which so that the question really is, how do firms develop a people strategy that supports the firm's financial capital and also its human capital needs? And that's really kind of the critical issue there. And I think it's fair to say that the starting point on that is that what got a firm to where it is now will be categorically likely insufficient to get firms to where they need to be in the future going forward. And the choice in terms of making that movement from where how you've historically been operating to the way you need to be operating going forward in the future to align those human capital and financial capital needs. The essential choice is, are you going to, as a firm, operate proactively and strategically, or are you going to be operating reactively and without a plan? And what I'm seeing repeatedly amongst firms is that those firms that are choosing to operate in a very strategic manner are going to do best. That it goes without saying. And the firms that have what I would call an embedded, people-focused contemporary culture are going to do better than more traditional firms. And that transition from operating in a more traditional way to a more contemporary way is not always easy. I mean, I see firms struggling with that because the power of habit and is a very, very strong impetus that pulls firms backwards. What I typically recommend to firms is that the starting point is to look at a firm's culture and say, what are the aspects of our culture that are serving us well? And then to develop a strategic plan for moving forward that is that really aligns well with those cultural elements, because in that way that strategy will embed with the firm's culture rather than working at odds. Now, what I've noticed is that this kind of process doesn't just happen. It needs to be led very intentionally by the firm's leadership. And often I will be asked by firms, so what do you mean, Emily, by a contemporary people-focused culture? What are the attributes of that kind of culture that we might want to incorporate into our firm? And what comes to mind for me is that those firms operate in a way that is interactive, they're collaborative, they tend to minimize hierarchy, which particularly for law firms is something that can often be kind of counterintuitive. They're consultative. They're intentionally self-critical. They are practical, they're realistic, and they realize that good outcomes depend on good process as well as good content. So let me give you a couple examples of the kind of work that I've done with firms that's been really, I think, helpful in this regard. So there was a firm that I worked with, and the presenting problem, if you will, was that they were getting a lot of feedback when staff were leaving in exit interviews about the fact that the firm felt like a psychologically unsafe place in which to work. And so the partners contacted me and they said, what can we do to try to turn that around? And so the process that we engaged in, which worked well, was that I did a series of interviews, both with the partners and also with many of the staff members. And we put together a discussion, a collaborative discussion. And what came out of that was that the firm developed a behavioral charter for everybody in the firm. And that then became rolled out across the firm and implemented on a day-to-day basis. And it really kind of reversed some of the negative trends that were happening with the staff. Another example was I was brought in by a firm to take a look, a very traditional firm historically, to take a look at what they were doing in terms of their processes and procedures and their people management and so forth. And again, that interviewing process identified a series of changes that needed to be made. And the firm, to its great credit, rolled out those changes across the way the firm operated as a whole. So generally, if I'm asked by a firm, what's the process that we as a firm should engage in, we as leadership, the partners of a firm should engage in, to try to bring our culture into better alignment with what our people needs are, and essentially to do well by doing good, by really being there for our people. And the process that I typically recommend is first to do a diagnostic interviewing process, then to develop some kind of strategic planning discussion that involves all of the relevant constituencies in the firm. And that what comes out of that kind of strategic planning discussion is some very crisp, clear action steps. And then the firm engages in the implementation of those action steps. And then there's a very intentional process of following back around and checking in as to how things are going on a regular interval. So those are my suggestions for what firms might want to do to get better alignment between that human and the financial capital.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Emily. And so we'll move on to that next step in terms of rethinking your client service approach. So your own organisation is needing to change and continue to evolve, but so have your customers. Are you thinking about your strategy and in-market approach? How are you putting your customers at the centre of everything you do? How are you rethinking your approach to service, marketing, pricing? So Andrew, you work with many professional services firms to help them discover and capture value in pricing and customer service to support their strategy. What can firms practically do if they want to start evolving their customer service approach to deliver more value to their clients and bottom line?
Yeah, sure. So probably the first thing is to understand, like, make sure you've got a very clear view of how your clients deliver value to their customers. So what is their value generation chain? And then how can your services fit within that value generation chain to make sure and make sure you understand exactly, you know, how you're turning the dial on their on how they deliver value to their customers. And so besides the usual, like making sure you understand how those organisations work, I think client listening is extremely important and getting more important. And I think that most firms don't do this very well. And when I say don't do it very well, sometimes there's a lot of client listening, but not necessarily listening about how we deliver value and how we mitigate risk. And I think moving those questions away from, not necessarily moving away from, maybe supplementing questions around how's the relationship and are we getting along, to how do we deliver value, how might we deliver more value, and what are we doing that you don't like that we're doing. And then so that listening should be quite broad. It should be a combination, in my view, of both formal listening, so where the client understands that we're having a listening exercise so that we learn, but also informal conversations. And the informal conversations, and at all levels in your firm and at all levels in the client organisation, really trying to uncover how are we delivering value, how could we do that better, and what are we doing that you just don't like us doing. So I think it starts there. And then once you've listened and you've captured what clients are telling you, then I think the next thing goes into offering design and offering communication. So this gets to some of the things that Paul was talking about earlier, about knowing who you are and what you're delivering, and also moving away from delivery of the services, so delivering outputs, to delivering outcomes, making that shift. So how do we change our offering design so that it moves from, we're doing this service, which is a very mechanical type service, and we shift the language and the service itself to be more about the outcomes that service delivers. So probably a good example of that I see, I'll use the lawyers as an example, is that often I'll ask lawyers, what do you do for your clients? And they'll say, we do the documents. You go, well, what does that mean? And what does that mean is the right question. And just go, well, we write the documents around a particular sector or a particular client need. But if you explore that by drilling down into it, what does that mean? What does that mean? What's the value of that? Then those documents are really agreements between supply and demand, and they fit within a broader economic context and help the economy drive value overall. But so moving that, if we want to move to outcome-based thinking, we've got to move up a level as to not just we're delivering documents, but how do those documents fit in a broader value chain, and then start introducing some of the language. Maybe talk too much around those languages, it's the right level, but start introducing some of that language into your client conversations so that they can more easily tie the services you're delivering to value that they deliver to their customers. So offering design is important. So building an offering structure so that it's easy for clients to see where high value sits, where low value sits, and therefore it's easier for you to capture that high value where it exists. But gives the client options, especially in times where the costs are going to potentially be under watch, that they've got options to go to lower priced and maybe lower value solutions if required. The next thing that firms can do is just improve their communication and their negotiation communications overall, so their sales and negotiation communications. Your partners or your leaders, your sales leaders, should have a playbook in that regard. So do they have a playbook so that they're able to have the conversations that they need to have service they're offering, and be able to deflect price-based negotiation and ensure that they're defending the value that they have on the table. And the other thing is consistency. So at a time that there's going to be a lot of pressure potentially, so as the economy slows down, there's going to be a lot of pressure on your prices, and so how do we ensure that we have consistency across your client base, and that certain clients, so we remove as many clients as we can that are getting unearned discounts and unearned price advantage, and by doing that, we're focusing on the areas that'll have the least impact to the firm, and those clients that will have the least impact if they happen to be lost. I find if you have the right conversation and get to value and have the right offering design so the client can see that value, the chances of losing a client as you defend prices in tougher economic climates are very low.
Great, thank you for that, Andrew, and really good points in terms of that deep client listening and articulating ways to articulate value as well. So, Emily, many firms also work internationally, servicing customers in different time zones, usually across different industries, and with different but usually extremely high expectations on delivery. So how can firms change how they deliver great service while helping their employees' well-being, or meet their change in desires to not necessarily work the long hours anymore? And how can they bring their clients into this challenge?
Yeah. Again, just such a pressing topic right now, and I would say there are really three things that I recommend to firms in that regard. First of all, look critically at what your firm is now doing in terms of how it delivers services. So that critical, looking realistically and critically at what you're now doing. Number two, to focus on optimal delegation and team structure. And number three, to develop better, smarter ways to manage client expectation and deliver services. So first of all, looking at critically, taking that good hard look at what you're doing and what might, as your firm, be holding you back from offering services in ways that are going to be more appropriate based on what your clients are looking for. And what I find often is that much of the resistance to change in law firms is driven by habit, history, and anxiety about change. Law is a very, very traditional kind of practice, and that's true, I think, for many professional practices. So the process consists of looking at what's working well for your firm, for your people, and for your clients, and perhaps what's not working so well, and engaging all of your constituents. So your staff, your professionals, your clients, in that your support staff, looking critically at what's going on and how you're offering things. And also having a very candid discussion about what would success look like in terms of what our clients are looking for, and using the answer to that question to drive a lot of the kinds of decisions that are being made. I'm also seeing firms thinking outside the box, going back to the point you made, Amber, about the long hours and the international service offerings and all of those things. And some firms, interestingly, are beginning to look a bit at the medical model of on-call service, so that they'll literally have some of their staff be on call at certain times to answer the needs of clients who may be overseas in different time zones and things like that. So people are doing very creative things. I'm also seeing firms designing and implementing pilot projects to come up with innovative ways to address the needs of their clients wherever they're located. And the more nimble and realistic those approaches are, the better they seem to be working. So again, looking critically at what you're doing and what you're not doing. Number two, focusing on optimal delegation and team structure. If you tease apart what's going on in many law firms, first of all, teams are not working particularly effectively. There's not that kind of collaboration. And number two, delegation is not occurring well. Both delegation in terms of how an entire team operates, and then also delegation from the point of view of the kind of one-on-one conversation that a partner, for example, might have with a delegatee. So looking critically at that, because if there's slippage in the operation of the team or in delegation, that it's going to mean that client service suffers. And then number three, developing better ways to manage client expectations. And I think this has been a bit of a sacred cow, particularly in the practice of law, that partners are very hesitant to, for example, say to a client, look, to offer you the best possible service, it's going to cost X or Y, or there are going to be time constraints in terms of our ability to get documents done. But it's much better to have those kinds of difficult conversations up front with a client rather than having something derail later on. So being candid about that. An example I saw actually of a firm that handled this well, it was an estate planning practice. And a client came to the firm and said, I want you to handle this large estate for me. And the partners sat down and looked at what they could do and what they had the staffing to handle. And they went back to the client and they said, look, to do a really good job, this is what it's going to cost. This is the time frame. And if that doesn't work for you, then let me refer you to another firm that might be able to do what you want. And the client went and talked with other firms, realized that the client's expectations were unrealistic, and came back to that firm that had been very candid about what they could do and what they couldn't do. So it's that kind of honesty in those conversations that I think is really going to be critical in today's environment. The other thing, of course, is that I'm seeing firms moving away from the traditional hourly-based model of billing into much more innovative kind of billing structures that might be more value-based billing rather than hourly-based. And again, having very candid conversations with clients about what those billing arrangements are going to be, because most client dissatisfaction on some level begins with billing. Begins and ends with billing. So if you get that right, you're going to be in good shape, I think.
Great, thanks for those tips and examples there, Emily. So I guess moving on a little bit from that, just looking at that engaging and retaining staff piece, which we all know is a huge issue at the moment. We keep hearing about the Great Resignation, the quiet quit, the hot labour market, and it's true that it's not only business owners asking themselves questions about what they want from their professionals' lives. Sometimes it's not just better pay or the ability to work remotely. Some people are completely changing directions, heading off on OEs, starting something new, or even just taking some time out to reassess. So just back to you, Emily, with many businesses facing challenges with retention and recruitment in a sector historically known for these long hours and competition to reach partnership, what can firms do about their engagement and career path options if partnership is not the ultimate goal?
Yeah, Yeah. And increasingly I'm hearing that from younger lawyers that they're not necessarily aspiring to become partners. And that's new. I mean, that wasn't the case 5 years ago. And what I'm seeing is that, particularly among younger lawyers, what they're looking for is they're looking for multiple things. They want an appropriate level of compensation. They want to do work that's meaningful. They want a manageable and sustainable work-life balance. And very importantly, they want to feel that they're being valued uniquely, that they're not being viewed as a fungible commodity, but instead that they're being viewed as a unique and very valuable resource. And historically, within the practice of law, and I think, again, many professions, there can be high levels of IQ, intelligence, but relatively low levels of EQ, emotional intelligence. And so when a firm decides to really invest proactively in creating a carefully constructed and individualized pathway forward for a young professional, that professional, that lawyer, that engineer, whatever, is likely to stick around because they feel invested in. And it's more those soft skills and that ability to communicate in a way that is supportive, that is tailored, that is really focused on what does success mean for that individual. That's going to result in an individual professional staying around longer with a firm, or perhaps returning to a firm after a period of doing something else. And as part of that, I think it's really important for firms to be looking very closely at their current appraisal process. Because again, what may have served them well from an appraisal perspective may not be appropriate anymore. Getting feedback from people, are they being given the information they need, and so forth. Part of that appraisal process, increasingly what I'm seeing is that law firms in particular are beginning to implement partner peer review processes and holding partners accountable in a way that perhaps historically they haven't done. And all of this ultimately, I think, comes back to being able to have what historically have been called difficult conversations in constructive ways that give people the kind of information they need to make well-informed choices about themselves and their futures, and that people feel cared for and invested in. If you can do that, you're going to be successful.
Great, thanks, Emily. And so, Andrew, customer satisfaction is often a result of engaged employees. How can changing your service model help you achieve business success as well as people engagement?
Sure, I'll be quick because I'm cognizant of time. So what I've been talking about is listening and getting closer to customer value, and customer value is all about purpose, really. And what we're seeing, I think, is another trend, and it's covered in Paul's paper, but Emily's been touching on as well, is that your people, they also want purpose and meaning. So the closer we can get to customer value, the closer we can get to defining clearly how our firms help our clients deliver value to their customers and help our clients sustain their business. That helps with that connection to purpose. So getting closer to value is not only better for the firm's profitability, but it's also better for your people. And I guess the other thing, and I'm sure Emily touched on some of this, and it's definitely in the paper, is that this digital transformation, the younger employees, they're looking for that digital transformation in your business. They don't want to be working for a firm that's stuck in traditional ways. A lot of them are looking for that in their business. They're looking for the teaming. They're looking for contribution to society. And so those, I guess, connections to purpose that are outside necessarily the core model of your business. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Some really great points there. So Emily, just to wrap up this section, so what are your practical tips to help business owners, partners, and leaders engage with and understand how to drive teams better in this evolving world?
Mm-hmm. Focus on communication. Focus on the individual. as a unique sort of there's almost what comes to mind for me metaphorically is that if you think about your people like a string of pearls, that each of the people, each of those pearls is unique and critical to the functioning of the organization. And if you bring that level of focus on the individual, bringing emotional intelligence into the workplace, as well as high functioning intelligence, that you're going to have good outcomes. And again, choosing to be very proactive about this, to be strategic and proactive and fearless in a lot of ways. The motto that I often will share with firms is that you will do best financially when you are doing good. You will do well when you do good. So focus on that for your people and what it is that's going to make them feel appreciated and supported within your organization. And what are the aspects of your organization's culture that reinforce that? Bring those consciously to the forefront and incorporate them into your strategic planning process. Your strategy will embed if you do that.
Thank you, Emily. And looking at the time, it's probably all we've got time for today, but really appreciate these great thoughts in terms of that really deep listening, focusing on those critical success factors, but listening to your people, listening to your clients, and being strategic and proactive about doing that as well. So thank you, Emily, Andrew, and Paul, for joining our Westpac Smarts discussion today, a discussion full of fascinating insights and practical tips. And I think all of you in the audience, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy Thursday to join us. If you do have any follow-up questions, please do send these to events@westpac.co.nz. An email will also be sent to all attendees with a recording of today's webinar. Thank you all again, and I hope you have a fantastic day.